The autumn sun spilled through the front window of my bookstore. Timeless tales, casting soft, golden patches across the wooden shelves. It was early October, and the air outside carried that crisp, earthy scent that always reminded me of new beginnings. I stood behind the counter, my hands tracing the worn grain of the oak. A counter my late husband, Robert, and I had built together 15 years ago. Every knot in the wood, every scratch, held a story. This place wasn't just a shop. It was my heart, my dream, my refuge after a lifetime of teaching literature to high school kids who mostly wanted to be anywhere else. I'm Clara Bennett, 60 years old, though I don't feel it most days. After Robert passed from cancer a decade ago, I poured everything into this bookstore. It was my way of keeping him close, of honoring the life we'd built together. We raised 2 kids here in this small New England town, Daniel, my steady, thoughtful son, now 32 and crunching numbers in Boston, and Sophie, my bright, restless daughter, 28, who still lives nearby. This shop, with its creaky floors and shelves stuffed with novels, poetry, and forgotten classics, was where I found peace after the grief. After the long nights of raising kids alone. It was where I read to children on Saturday mornings, where I hosted book clubs for folks who'd become like family. It was mine, but that morning, as I dusted a row of dog-eared paperbacks, a familiar unease settled in my chest. The phone on the counter buzzed, and Sophie's name lit up the screen. I froze, my hand hovering over a copy of Jane Eyre. Sophie's calls weren't what they used to be. Once, they were full of laughter, stories about her day, or questions about some book she'd found on my shelves. Now, they were about one thing: selling timeless tales. She and her husband, Liam, had been pushing me for months to let go of the shop to fund their big idea, a tech startup they swore would change the world. I'd said no, over and over, but Sophie didn't hear no. Not anymore. I picked up the phone, my thumb hesitating. The shop was quiet, save for the faint hum of the heater kicking on. Outside, leaves skittered across the sidewalk, red and gold in the morning light. I wanted to stay in that moment, in the stillness of my little world, but the buzzing phone wouldn't let me. I sighed and answered. "Morning, Sophie," I said, keeping my voice even, though my heart was already tightening. "Mom." "Hi." Sophie's voice was bright, too bright, like she was selling something. "I was just thinking about you. How's the shop doing?" I glanced around at the shelves, at the handwritten notes I'd tucked into favorite books, at the corner where I'd once caught Sophie, barely 5, pretending to read Charlotte's Web to a stuffed bear. "It's doing fine, honey, same as always." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her choosing her words. "Right, well, Liam and I were talking, and we really think it's time to revisit our idea. You know, about the shop. It's such a great opportunity." Mom. There it was, the same conversation, dressed up in new words, but always circling back to the same demand. My fingers tightened around the phone. "Sophie, we've been over this. I'm not selling." Another pause, longer this time. "Just think about it, okay? Liam's got some new numbers, and we could really make this work for everyone." Her voice softened, but it felt practiced, like she'd rehearsed it with Liam beforehand. I set the phone down after we hung up, my hands trembling just a little. The shop felt smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. I walked to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass, watching the leaves dance in the breeze. When had my daughter stopped seeing this place for what it was? When had she stopped seeing me? Oh, and if you're listening to this, don't forget to subscribe to Her Voice Echoes and drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. This is a story about family, about holding on to what matters, and I'm glad you're here to hear it. I stood there in timeless tales, the phone still warm in my hand from Sophie's call, and felt a heaviness settle over me. The bookstore was quiet, but my mind was anything but. Sophie's words echoed, sharp and cutting, even though she'd wrapped them in that sugary tone she'd perfected over the years. "It's such a great opportunity." Mom. Opportunity for who? I wondered. Not for me. Not for the shelves of books that had been my sanctuary since Robert died. Not for the kids who came every Saturday to hear me read, their eyes wide with wonder. No, this was about Sophie and Liam, their dreams, their plans, their future, and somehow, I was just a stepping stone. It wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation. For months, Sophie had been circling like a hawk. Her calls growing more frequent. Her tone more insistent. At first, it was subtle. "Mom, have you thought about what you'll do with the shop when you retire?" she'd ask. As if I were 1 foot in the grave at 60. Then Liam started joining in. His voice smooth as polished glass. Talking about their startup, a fancy app that would connect readers with independent publishers. The future of books, he called it, as if my little shop, with its creaky floors and handwritten book recommendations, was some dusty relic from another era. I walked to the back of the store, where a small table held a kettle and a tin of chamomile tea. As the water boiled, I thought about Sophie as a little girl. She used to love this place. She'd spend hours curled up in the children's corner, sketching imaginary book covers or pretending to be a librarian, her tiny hands stamping blank pages with an old stamp Robert had found at a flea market. "This is my library, Mommy," she'd say, her smile brighter than the summer sun. Where had that girl gone? When had my daughter, my bright, curious Sophie, turned into someone who saw my life's work as nothing more than a paycheck? The kettle whistled, pulling me back. I poured the tea, the steam curling up like a memory I couldn't hold onto. That's when my phone buzzed again, not a call this time, but a text from Liam. "Clara, Sophie mentioned your chat. I'd love to sit down and talk about our vision for the startup. How about tea at Autumn Glow this Thursday?" My treat. He ended it with a smiley face, and I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Liam always acted like we were old friends, but I'd known him long enough to see through the charm. He was a salesman, plain and simple, and I was the customer he thought he could close. I sipped my tea, staring at the text. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend Sophie and Liam would drop this whole idea if I just held firm. But another part, the part that still saw Sophie as that little girl with the library stamp, wanted to believe she might listen. Might understand why this shop meant everything to me. I typed back, "Thursday works, 2 p.m., and hit send before I could change my mind. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I helped a regular customer find a poetry collection for her book club. Read a picture book to a shy toddler who clung to his mother's hand. And dusted the shelves that Robert had built with such care. But Sophie's words kept creeping in, like a cold draft through a cracked window. "You can't live with old books forever, Mom." She'd said that a week ago, during one of our late-night calls. Her voice had been sharp, impatient, like I was a child who didn't get it. "You're 60, Mom. What's the plan? You can't keep running that shop until you're 80. 60. The word stung, not because I was ashamed of my age, but because Sophie wielded it like a weapon. Like it made me less capable, less relevant. I'd spent 30 years teaching kids to love stories. 10 more building this shop into a place where people could find themselves in the pages of a book. I'd raised 2 kids on my own after Robert's cancer took him too soon. I'd paid off the shop's loan, kept the lights on through lean years, and never once asked Sophie or her brother, Daniel, for a dime. And yet, to her, I was just old. I set my tea down, untouched, and walked to the children's corner. There was a small wooden chair there. One Robert had painted blue for Sophie when she was 6. I ran my fingers over it, feeling the faint dents where she'd banged her toy cars against it. I could still see her there, giggling as I read The Velveteen Rabbit, her eyes sparkling with every word. That Sophie felt so far away now, replaced by someone who saw my shop, my home, as a means to an end. Another text came through, this time from Sophie. "Thanks for agreeing to meet, Mom. Liam's so excited to share the details. This could be big for all of us." 3 heart emojis followed, and I felt a pang in my chest. Sophie hadn't sent me heart emojis in years. Not since she'd moved out and married Liam. Now, they felt like bait, a lure to pull me into their plan. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned off the shop's lights and locked the door, the jingle of the bell above it echoing in the quiet. Outside, the autumn leaves glowed under the streetlights, and I stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool air. This shop wasn't just a building. It was where I'd rebuilt my life after Robert, where I'd found purpose when the world felt too heavy. Sophie and Liam thought they could take that from me, but they didn't know me as well as they thought. I wasn't just some sentimental old woman clinging to the past. I was Clara Bennett, and I'd fought harder battles than this. If you're still with me, thank you for listening to her voice echoes. This story's just beginning, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt like someone you loved didn't see the real you? Share your story below, and let's keep this conversation going. Thursday came faster than I wanted. I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, smoothing the collar of my navy cardigan. It wasn't fancy, but it was the kind of thing I'd worn to every parent-teacher conference. Every town meeting, every moment that mattered. Today felt like one of those moments, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the way Sophie's texts had piled up over the week. Each one a little more eager, a little more polished. Maybe it was Liam's smiley face, still sitting in my phone like a warning. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and headed out to Autumn Glow, the trendy tea shop in town that felt as foreign to me as a spaceship. The drive was short, just 10 minutes through our little town, past the old library where I'd spent my career and the park where I used to push Sophie and Daniel on the swings. Autumn Glow sat on Main Street, all sleek glass and modern charm, with chalkboard signs boasting artisanal teas and motivational quotes painted on the walls. It wasn't my kind of place, too polished, too perfect, but it was Liam's. I spotted him through the window, sitting at a corner table, his suit jacket draped over the chair like he owned the room. His dark hair was slicked back, and he was scrolling through his phone with that easy confidence I'd never trusted. "Clara," he called out as I stepped inside, his voice warm enough to fool anyone who didn't know better. He stood, offering a quick hug that felt more like a performance than affection. "You look great. Thanks for coming," I nodded, settling into the chair across from him. The air smelled of lavender and overpriced pastries, and the hum of conversation around us felt like static. A young waitress with a nose ring appeared, and Liam ordered something called a matcha latte with oat milk and a hint of rosewater. I asked for plain black tea, ignoring the flicker of disappointment in her eyes. "So," I said, folding my hands on the table, "you wanted to talk about your vision." Liam's smile widened, the kind of smile that probably worked on investors and clients. "Clara, I'm so glad you're here. Sophie and I have been working hard on this, and we think Timeless Tales could be the heart of something revolutionary." He leaned forward, his eyes bright with practiced enthusiasm. "We're building an app, Lit Connect, that links readers directly with independent publishers. It's like a digital renaissance for books. And your shop, with its charm and history, could be our flagship location." I sipped my tea, letting the warmth steady me. "Flagship location," I repeated. "What does that mean, exactly?" He didn't miss a beat. "We'd transform Timeless Tales into a cultural hub. Picture it, a digital library for online workshops, a space for author events, maybe even a chic little cafe where people can sip coffee and browse ebooks. We'd keep a corner for your physical books, of course, a nod to tradition." He waved his hand, like my life's work was a quaint afterthought. "The property's been appraised at $950,000, which is conservative. Honestly, given its location, we'd need about $700,000 to get started. But you'd be a silent partner, Clara, part of the success story." I set my cup down, the clink louder than I meant it to be. "And the shop itself? The shelves, the reading nook, the children's corner? Oh, we'd preserve the spirit of it," Liam said, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "We'd need to modernize, of course. Open up some walls, add some tech-friendly spaces, maybe turn the back room into a studio for live-streamed events. It'd be a new kind of legacy." Legacy. The word hit me like a slap. Timeless Tales wasn't just a building, it was where I'd read to Sophie when she was little. Where I'd cried over bills I wasn't sure I could pay. Where I'd celebrated paying off a loan with a glass of Robert's favorite bourbon. It was where I'd found myself again after he was gone. And here was Liam, talking about tearing it down to build some sterile tech hub, calling it my legacy. "Liam," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this shop isn't just an investment. It's my home. It's where I raised my kids. Where I rebuilt my life. I'm not selling it." His smile faltered, just for a second, before snapping back into place. "I hear you, Clara, I do. But think about it, this isn't about selling out. It's about transforming something small into something global. You'd be leaving Sophie and Daniel a real inheritance. not just a dusty old shop. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. You're 60. Don't you want to do something big before it's too late? Too late. The words cut deeper than I expected. Like a knife slipped between my ribs. I gripped my teacup, the heat burning my fingers. I've done plenty, Liam, I said, sharper than I meant, and I'm not done yet. He blinked, caught off guard, but recovered quickly. Of course, I didn't mean it like that. Just talk to Sophie. Okay? She's so excited about this. She thinks you could be part of something amazing. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through what looked like a slick presentation. We've got numbers, projections, even a mock-up of what the new space could look like. I stood, leaving my tea half finished. I don't need to see numbers. Liam, my answer's no. I dropped a $5 bill on the table, more out of habit than necessity, and walked out. The cool October air hit my face, and I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from anger. Liam thought he could charm me into giving up everything I'd built. Sophie thought she could guilt me into it. They were wrong. As I drove back to Timeless Tales, the town blurred past, familiar houses, familiar streets, familiar dreams. I wasn't just fighting for my shop. I was fighting for me. For the woman who'd kept going when life tried to break her. And I wasn't about to let anyone, not even my own daughter, take that away. Thank you for staying with Her Voice Echoes. If this story's hitting home, drop a comment below and tell me about a time you had to stand your ground. Your voice matters, and I'd love to hear it. The drive back from Autumn Glow felt longer than it was. The autumn leaves blurring into streaks of red and gold as I gripped the steering wheel. Liam's words kept replaying in my head, sharp and slick, like a salesman's pitch I couldn't shake. You're 60. Don't you want to do something big before it's too late? Too late, as if my life, my shop, my years of building something real were just a placeholder for their grand plans. I pulled into the parking lot behind Timeless Tales, the familiar jingle of the shop's bell greeting me as I stepped inside. But the warmth of the bookstore couldn't quiet the unease growing in my chest. Something wasn't right. Liam's polished presentation, Sophie's sudden heart emojis, they felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't yet see. I locked the door and sank into the armchair in the reading nook, surrounded by shelves of novels that had always felt like old friends. The shop was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. Sophie hadn't always been like this. She used to spend summers here, her nose buried in Anne of Green Gables, her laughter filling the air when I'd catch her sneaking extra cookies from the jar behind the counter. But now, she and Liam saw Timeless Tales as nothing more than a dollar sign. And that, legacy, talk? It wasn't about honoring me or Robert. It was about erasing us. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. Another text from Sophie. Mom, thanks for meeting Liam. I know it's a lot to take in. But can we talk at the shop tomorrow? Just family. No pressure. No pressure. Right. The words felt like a hook disguised as a hug. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure whether to reply or let it sit. That's when I knew I needed someone I could trust. Someone who'd always seen me for who I was. I called Daniel, my eldest, my steady one, working as a data analyst in Boston. The phone rang twice before his voice came through, warm and familiar, despite the faint crackle of the long-distance line. Mom, everything okay? It's late for you, Daniel, I said, my voice shakier than I meant it to be. I need to talk. And it all poured out, the months of Sophie's calls, Liam's pushy meeting at the tea shop, the way they talked about Timeless Tales like it was a rundown shack instead of my life's work. I told him about Liam's appraisal, the $700,000 they wanted, the way he'd called me old, as if my years made me less capable of knowing what I wanted. Daniel listened, the way he always did, quiet and focused, like he was piecing together a puzzle. When I finished, he let out a long breath. Mom, this doesn't sound like just a bad idea. It sounds like they're setting you up. Setting me up? I repeated, my stomach twisting. What do you mean? I've seen this before, he said, his voice steady but edged with concern. In my work, I've analyzed contracts for startups. People like Liam, they talk big. But there's often something shady behind it. Did he mention who's funding this app? Any names? I thought back to the meeting. To Liam's vague talk of investors and opportunities. Not really, I admitted, but he kept saying they have a big partner. Someone pushing them to move fast. Daniel paused, and I could almost hear him thinking, that's a red flag. Mom, I heard Liam mention a big investor once. At a family dinner last year. He wouldn't give details, just changed the subject. I didn't think much of it then. But now, I'm coming home. Daniel, you don't have to. I'm booking a flight. He interrupted, his tone firm. I'll be there by tomorrow afternoon. Don't agree to anything until I get there. Okay? And don't sign anything, no matter how harmless they make it sound. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. The relief washing over me like a warm wave. Daniel had always been my rock. Even as a boy, while Sophie was off chasing dreams and breaking rules. Daniel was the one who'd sit with me after Robert's funeral, helping me sort through bills when I could barely think straight. He'd never asked me for anything. Just called every Sunday to check in. Sent me rare books he'd found in Boston's antique shops. He was the one who'd never made me feel like I owed him my life. Okay, I said softly, I'll wait for you. After we hung up, I sat in the dark shop. The only light coming from the street lamp outside. I thought about Sophie's text. Her just family meeting that felt more like an ambush. I thought about Liam's smooth promises. The way he dangled the word legacy like bait. And I thought about Daniel. Dropping everything to come home. To stand by my side. For the first time in weeks. I felt a spark of hope. Whatever Sophie and Liam were planning, I wouldn't face it alone. As I locked up the shop and stepped into the chilly night, I glanced back at Timeless Tales. Its windows glowing softly. This place was more than a business. It was my story, written in every book, every memory, every moment I'd fought to keep it alive. And no one, not even my own daughter, was going to take that from me. Thank you for listening to Her Voice Echoes. If you've ever felt like someone was trying to pull the rug out from under you, share your story in the comments. Your voice is part of this journey, and I'd love to hear it. The next morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach. The kind that comes when you know something big is coming, but you're not sure you're ready for it. Timeless Tales felt different as I opened the shop, quieter. Somehow, like it was holding its breath. I busied myself rearranging a display of classic novels. But my eyes kept drifting to the clock. Noon, that's when Sophie and Liam would show up. With their, just family, meeting that Daniel had warned might be an ambush. I trusted him, but the thought of facing my own daughter like this, like she was someone I couldn't trust, made my heart ache. By 11, I was pacing the shop. My hands smoothing the same shelf over and over. Then I heard the crunch of gravel outside. And my heart leapt. It wasn't Sophie, it was Daniel. He stepped out of a rental car. His dark blazer sharp against the autumn light. His face breaking into that familiar, steady smile. Mom, he said, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of coffee and city air. I told you I'd be here. You didn't have to come all this way, I said, though I clung to him a little longer than I meant to. He pulled back, his eyes serious. Yes, I did. Let's go inside and talk. We sat at the small table in the reading nook, surrounded by books that felt like armor. I told him everything again, Liam's slick pitch at the tea shop. Sophie's texts, the way they'd made me feel like I was standing in the way of their future. Daniel listened, his pen scratching notes on a legal pad, his face calm but focused, like he was analyzing data for one of his Boston clients. Mom, he said when I finished, this isn't just about the shop. They're moving too fast, too hard. I think there's more to this. Before I could ask what he meant, the bell above the door jingled. Sophie and Liam walked in, followed by two others, a man in a gray suit carrying a briefcase and a woman with a tablet. Her face all business. Sophie's smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mom, you look great, she said, her voice a little too cheerful. Thanks for having us. Liam stepped forward, all charm. Clara, this is Henry, our attorney, and Ms. Carter from the bank. We thought it'd be good to have everyone here to talk through the details. I glanced at Daniel, who gave me a small nod. Please, sit, I said, gesturing to the table. My voice was steady, but inside, I was bracing for a storm. Sophie spread a folder of papers across the table. The same table where I'd read stories to her as a child. Mom, we've reworked the plan to address your concerns, she said, her words practiced. We'd only develop part of the property, keep the shop's front room as it is. Maybe add a digital studio in the back. You'd still own the building. And we'd handle all the business side. Liam nodded, sliding the folder toward me. It's a win-win, Clara. You get to keep your shop's charm. And we get the capital to launch Lit Connect. We just need you to sign some preliminary agreements to start the zoning process. Nothing binding, he added quickly, but his eyes flicked to Henry. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting. Actually, I'd like to take a look at those papers first. I'm Daniel Bennett, Clara's son and her legal advisor. I specialize in contract analysis for tech startups. The air in the room shifted. Like a cold wind had slipped through the cracks. Sophie's smile froze. Daniel, when did you? I mean, it's great to see you. But this is a family matter. It is, Daniel said, his tone unwavering. And I'm family. He opened his own leather portfolio, pulling out a stack of papers. I've done some research on your startup. Lit Connect. Interesting name, considering it's already trademarked by a company in California. They're currently suing 6 other entities for infringement. Liam's face paled, but he recovered fast. That's a minor issue. We can rebrand. Can you? Daniel flipped a page. Because your trademark application was rejected 2 weeks ago. Which means every pitch you've given my mother, every brochure with that name, is worthless. He turned to Ms. Carter. And your bank's prepared to offer a loan based on my mother's property as collateral. Correct? Meaning she'd be liable if this fails. Ms. Carter shifted uncomfortably. Well, yes, but, and here's the real problem. Daniel interrupted, his voice like steel. I reviewed the documents you sent Mom yesterday. Buried in the fine print is a clause that transfers not just the shop but her entire estate, her house, her retirement savings, to Sophie if the startup goes under. A startup backed by a big investor who, according to public records, was fined last year for financial fraud. A friend of yours, Liam, isn't he? The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could shatter glass. Sophie's eyes widened, her hands gripping the table. That's not, Mom, we'd never what? I said, my voice quieter than I expected but heavy with years of hurt. Never try to trick me into signing away everything I've worked for? Never treat me like some foolish old woman who doesn't know better. I stood, my hands steady now. You thought you could use my love for you to take my home. My savings, my life. You thought I'd be too weak to say no. Liam started to speak, but I cut him off. Get out, all of you, now. Henry was already gathering his papers. Ms. Carter hurrying behind him. Sophie hesitated, her eyes pleading. Mom, please, you don't understand. I understand enough, I said, opening the shop's door. The bell jingled, sharp and final. Liam grabbed his briefcase, his charm gone. Sophie lingered for a moment, her face a mix of shame and defiance. Then followed. The door closed behind them. And the shop was mine again. Daniel put a hand on my shoulder. You did it, Mom. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. We did it. I couldn't have faced them without you. Outside, their cars pulled away, the sound fading into the October afternoon. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. But the weight of Sophie's betrayal lingered, a wound I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. Thank you for staying with her voice echoes. Have you ever had to stand up to someone you loved? Share your story in the comments. Your voice is part of this. And I'm listening. The shop was quiet after Sophie and Liam left. The bell above the door still echoing in my mind. A sharp note that marked the end of something I couldn't quite name. I stood there, leaning against the counter, my hands still trembling from the weight of what had just happened. Timeless Tales felt both empty and full, empty of the daughter I thought I knew. Full of the memories that had held me together all these years. Daniel stood beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. His presence steady as the oak shelves Robert and I had built so long ago. You okay, Mom? He asked, his voice soft but grounded, the way it always was. I nodded, though tears stung my eyes. I will be, thanks to you. I turned to him, taking in his familiar face, those dark eyes that always seemed to see more than he let on. The same eyes that had watched me so carefully after Robert's death. I don't know what I would have done without you here today. He smiled, a small, quiet thing that reminded me of his father. You would have figured it out. You always do. We moved to the reading nook, where I poured us each a mug of coffee from the old pot I kept in the back. The scent filled the air, warm and familiar, grounding me in this place that was still mine. We sat at the little table, surrounded by books that had witnessed every chapter of my life, grief, joy, struggle, triumph. I looked at Daniel, at the man he'd become, and felt a swell of gratitude that almost hurt. Sophie might have broken my heart today, but Daniel had reminded me what family could be. I'm thinking of doing something new with the shop, I said, the idea forming as I spoke. Maybe start a writing workshop for the community, or a poetry night for the kids who come here. Keep this place alive, you know? Daniel's eyes lit up. That sounds like you, Mom. This shop's always been more than a business. It's a home, for you, for the town, for anyone who walks through that door. I sipped my coffee, letting his words settle. He was right. Timeless Tales wasn't just about books. It was about connection, about stories that brought people together, about the life I'd built brick by brick after Robert was gone. Sophie and Liam had seen it as a means to an end, a way to fund their dreams. But to me, it was the dream, and I wasn't done dreaming yet. As the afternoon light faded, casting long shadows across the shop, I caught our reflection in the front window, me, gray hair pulled back in a loose bun, and Daniel, his blazer off now, looking every bit like the boy who'd once helped me stack books after closing. We weren't just mother and son. We were allies, bound by something stronger than blood, trust, respect, love that didn't ask for anything in return. I realized then that family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes, it's what you choose, who you choose to stand by when the world tries to pull you down. Sophie might come around one day, or she might not, but I'd spent too long letting guilt and love blur the lines between supporting her and enabling her. That ended today. I'd fought for this shop, for my life, and I'd won, not because I'd outsmarted them, but because I'd remembered who I was. And here's what I've learned: life doesn't stop teaching you, no matter how old you get. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the people you love most, the ones who hurt you deepest. But those lessons can also show you your own strength, the kind that's been there all along, waiting for you to claim it. For me, that strength was in this shop, in the stories I've told, in the son who stood by me when I needed him most. And it's in you, too, if you choose to listen to your own voice. Thank you for joining me on this journey with Her Voice Echoes. If this story touched you, if you've ever had to fight for what's yours or redefine what family means, share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters, and I'm here to hear it. Let's keep these stories alive, together.